never believe where I was just at. Stick around, I'll tell you all about it. Whew. Hello friends, welcome back to the show. So glad to see you once again. And if you're new here, boy, did you pick a great time to jump in, because we're just winding down on the second season of Superman the Animated Series. And if you're like me and grew up on cartoons like these from the 90s, then you're in the right spot. Because today we're talking about the episode Apokolips Now, which originally aired as a two-parter on February 7th and 14th of 1998.
Well, strap on your six-gun, space cowboy.
Well, the much-anticipated episode Apokolips Now, which I say it like that because if you look, it says Apokolips ... now, all capitalized and exclamation mark. So I'm trying to read it as it correctly should be read. Now! Okay, sorry, I'll stop. Yeah, so this has been a much-anticipated episode. We've been building to this moment for a while. Darkseid has been featured in a couple of episodes, and he keeps referencing wanting to take over the planet and is biding his time to attack Superman at the right moment, and this is the moment. But is this two-parter everything that it could be? We'll talk all about that right after our 90-second Brainiac bomb. I'm going to give myself 90 seconds. This is a two-parter. I probably still won't be able to do it, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more fair. Mannheim is using some hover tanks to steal some money. Darkseid doesn't like that, and he blows up the money. And then a boom tube opens up, and Orion shows up and says, "We got to warn Superman. This is what's going on." They look at the mother box. He explains the idea of New Genesis and Apokolips and how they traded suns as a treaty. And then it's only thanks to Orion that they're able to stop these hover tanks. And he doesn't seem pleased. And he goes, Apokolips is going to try to attack again. So here's a device to call me on. And sure enough, they do. Darkseid blows up this power plant, and then we go into part two where we see a simulation from Star Labs that shows that he's going to try to destroy the core, and by doing that, so Superman drills through and tries to cool the core of the planet before it's destroyed, but his device doesn't work to call Orion, and then Darkseid sends Steppenwolf and some parademons to go destroy them, and they go and they fight and they get beat up, and Orion shows up at the last minute, but Superman's now captured, and Turpin and everybody goes, "Well, you're not going to get away with this, Darkseid, so don't even try." And so and then the people from New Genesis show up and say, "Hey, listen, this isn't going to happen. We're protecting this planet, so you can't destroy them." And they go, "Okay, fine, then I'll leave and won't destroy them." But before he leaves, he kills Judge Turpin. He kills Dan Turpin. Ooh, I mean, I gave myself 90 seconds, but that's pretty impressive still. I'm sure I missed some details, but it was close.
It was too easy.
Oh yeah. A real walk in the park.
So this episode's a pretty big deal. This is the one that we've been talking about for a while. They've been teasing and hinting at this for some time. And I think it's interesting, too, in the schedule. The last episode we saw, Warrior Queen, came out in November. And then this one comes out in February. So it's 2 months, 3 months? So it's like 2 months between episodes. And I think because they put a lot into this, they really wanted to make this a big deal. And it is. It's pretty epic couple of episodes, and you can tell right from the beginning that even the pacing of the story just takes a little bit more breathing room, which I like to see in a two-parter, and it doesn't feel as rushed and crammed in there. They fit a lot of story and a lot of elements in this in a very short amount of time, even for a two-parter.
He's coming.
Who is?
Darkseid.
I'm really enjoying the relationship between Darkseid and Mannheim. It was an episode about Mannheim that first introduced Darkseid, and we've watched him, and Mannheim's been there right beside Darkseid throughout the episodes when he does make an appearance. And it's kind of a neat relationship where Darkseid is using Mannheim as leverage on the planet Earth, and is very thoughtful and very deliberate about what he's trying to attack. And Mannheim is just kind of going along with it, but has his own agenda and still is very small-minded in thinking, hey, I'm going to steal a bunch of money. And so it's kind of neat how they build on that relationship. And it's also kind of dynamic that, you have Darkseid, who's a super powerful being, alien being, and matched up with just this run-of-the-mill gangster, basically. And that's kind of a neat dynamic. I like that.
Serve me well, Mannheim, and I'll make you a king.
And this episode, we use this opportunity to introduce Orion, who is a pretty cool character. I do have to say, I just enjoy the way he flies around on that jetpack machine thing. And so we introduce him into the episode, and we use the mother box to kind of do the story of the two planets, sister planets, Apokolips and New Genesis. And it makes sense. And we tell enough of their backstory to kind of understand what's going on, and it's used for purposes later on. And again, it doesn't feel crammed, and it doesn't feel like drawn out. It doesn't feel like a lot of exposition. It's just needed information pertinent to these episodes.
Worlds as different as daylight and darkness.
And I think that it's pretty neat how they structured these episodes. There's a lot of the two-parters or three-parters that are very much continuations, and you kind of can't take one without the other. This first episode, you could almost watch that on its own. They complete a full story with Orion showing up and explaining what Darkseid is trying to do. And he is useful in stopping them. And other than that little extra scene at the end where they're talking about the nuclear power plant and Darkseid's leaving Mannheim there to die with it, Superman seeing that explode, it's really a self-sustained episode, which I think is great because these episodes ran in a lot of reruns in a lot of different orders. And so the chances of seeing these two parts together were probably pretty slim. So I like it when they can truly stand on their own.
It isn't over.
And in part 2, we get to meet Steppenwolf, which I think is more accurately depicted in this animated series, how he is in the comics, versus what they did to him in the Justice League movie. And I'm not going to get into all that, but I felt like they were just trying to make Steppenwolf too grand of a character, and he's really just a henchman of Darkseid. Whereas what I wish they would have done in the Justice League movie is just went straight to Darkseid. Or at least have him featured in there rather than they kind of made Steppenwolf a standalone character without Darkseid, and it just didn't work for me. But I'm not talking about that.
I will take my place among the new gods.
But in this episode, we really get to see Steppenwolf in action with his parademon, which adds a great element to this episode, which is, again, makes it kind of a standalone story versus the first part, whereas this is kind of another story, even though it is a continuation. Different characters are involved in this.
I look forward to adding a new trophy to my collection.
But also, are they fighting in front of the Hall of Justice? You see the building in the background. Is that supposed to be the Hall of Justice? Does that become the Hall of Justice later? I do have to say there is a lot of fighting in this episode, and that itself doesn't bother me per se. It's the idea of this story. I mean, it really kind of turns Metropolis into a war zone, which is necessary for this story. And it's very enjoyable to watch, and it's very colorful and very bright and bold, kind of action-packed sequences in there. But I fear that they were doing it to try to stretch this episode out, because there's also a scene in there that I felt like took a really long time where Superman was drilling holes in the ocean. And it just seemed like I got the idea of what he was doing after 2 or 3 holes, but they just kept showing him do it more and more and more. We've spent several episodes waiting to see Darkseid. And then in this episode, I felt the same thing, that we're seeing Superman fighting Steppenwolf and the parademons. Let's see Darkseid, bring him in.
You're a magnificent opponent, Superman.
But then I get my wish when Darkseid shows up with Superman on the front of this tank vehicle as they drive into the center of town. And that scene is really well done. I mean, one, it's like pretty disturbing even as an adult to see Superman strung out like that and all ripped up and bloody, which again is one of those things that's like surprising that they were able to get away with that for a network kids show. But it was kind of crucial. I mean, it was kind of important to the story. It was very effective in that way.
Holy Joe.
And I like this idea that they established, that in this scene that they're able to build on this idea that Superman is a beacon of hope for the citizens of Metropolis, and kind of led by Dan Turpin, who was not always a big fan of Superman throughout the stories, but he stands toe-to-toe with Darkseid and says,
In a pig's eye!
which is a great speech and a great moment. And it's one of those moments where the stakes are high enough, and Superman's captured, Darkseid is powerful, that you sit there, the suspense is great because you're going, how are they going to get out of this? And of course, we have New Genesis that shows up and says,
My father has decreed this planet is under his protection.
and before Darkseid leaves, he of course kills Dan Turpin, which again is another shocking moment to have included in this episode.
But remember, victory has its price.
It's a powerful scene, and I think what makes it so powerful is Superman's reaction to it. Him to just completely lose control and lose his temper and destroys this tank, which I don't think we've really seen Superman lose his temper up to this point, but is justified because of what he just witnessed. I'm a little confused why that doesn't break the treaty that New Genesis set forth and said this planet's under our protection, but that aside, it's a moving scene.
I'm sorry.
And I guess what I was reading is that they had initially, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and the gang initially wanted Darkseid to kill Ma and Pa Kent. The network wouldn't allow that because they were going to have to bring them back later, but they really wanted to establish how evil Darkseid is and have him kill off somebody permanently, which this is the first time that this has happened in the series, that they kill him. Turpin is gone. He doesn't come back. And so to have a main character, wasn't like he was just set up for this episode. He has been in several of the episodes up to this point. To see him killed is pretty impactful.
Goodbye, old friend.
And I do like how throughout the course of these two episodes, as you look back, the relationship is really kind of healed between Superman and Turpin. And we get to see that come out, which I think is even more impactful, that you see them kind of finally make amends and then he's killed off.
In the end, the world didn't really need a Superman. Just a brave one.
And then, of course, at the end of the episode, we see that this episode was dedicated to Jack Kirby, who is, for anybody that's read comic books or knows anything about comic books, is a legend in the comic book world. I mean, certainly he's probably more known for his work in Marvel, but has done some substantial work in DC, including creating Darkseid and I believe co-creating Dan Turpin. To see him dedicated in this episode is really pretty neat. And then I was reading, I guess during the original broadcast of this episode, during the funeral scene, there was a bunch of different cameos in the crowd of people associated with Jack Kirby, both people that he had worked with, like Paul Dini and Alan Burnett, and even Stan Lee was in there, another Stan Lee cameo, but also characters that he created. So Nick Fury was there, and Reed Richards and Sue Storm, a bunch of the Fantastic Four, which I think is pretty neat to have that included in a DC episode. But I guess then in the future broadcasts of the show and on the DVDs and the releases of that, they ended up cutting that out or reworking that scene. I don't know if because of legal issues to include Marvel characters or what the reasoning was behind that. But I think it's neat that they included that. You know, I think that there's a lot of competition between Marvel and DC and which one's better. And a lot of fans get very heated about you're either DC or you're Marvel. I personally am a fan of both. I like different aspects of different ones. I've always kind of grew up with DC, and so I kind of gravitate to some of those characters more. But I enjoy Marvel. I mean, I'm wearing a Marvel shirt right now. And I think no matter if you're a fan of DC or Marvel, certainly Jack Kirby has influenced those characters and those comics for whatever you enjoy. And the way I always look at it is whether you're a fan of DC or Marvel, we all got beat up by the same football team. So there's no point in fighting amongst ourselves.
The pathetic beings of this planet won't have the will to resist me.
So when it comes time to rank this episode, it is pretty good. I think there was a lot of anticipation build up towards this episode, certainly for me, and I think that would be one of its negatives, was that there was so much anticipation built around this, and they were setting up this story for quite a while, that when it finally came here, I had pretty high expectations for it. Maybe that's unfair, but they certainly were building out a large story. And it is a large story, but there's still some parts of it that just I felt were kind of slow, that I felt were kind of drug out, that didn't need to be. I don't think that this could have been condensed into one episode. I like that each of the episodes kind of stand on their own, but still there was just a couple of slow spots. So for all those reasons, I have it ranking at the number 7 spot of my favorite episodes so far. I'm sure for a lot of you, maybe it ranks higher. Maybe for some of you, it ranks lower. But for me, it still falls in the top 10, which is great. But it does fall just below The Main Man. The Main Man for me just is such a fun episode. Lobo is such a neat character. And even though there's a lot of fighting in that, he makes it more entertaining to watch because of his little quips and his lines that he's tossing at Superman. And so that makes it a little bit more enjoyable. But it does beat out Solar Power, because as much as I like the character Luminous and as dynamic as that episode is, this certainly is just a bigger scale and a larger scope of a story in this one.
You want a piece of me? Come on, Rockhead.
So in honor of this being Dan Turpin's final appearance in the Superman series, let me know, what is your favorite line from Dan Turpin? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this episode, then click the thumbs up like button. If you want to see more episodes like this, then just hit subscribe. I have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. And next up, we have the last episode of the second season, another 2-parter, Little Girl Lost. So you don't want to miss that. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Andy Knode, and I'll see you soon.